Good afternoon, everybody. Post-lunch sessions are always slightly somnolent, if I may use that word. But I hope we'll be able to perk you all up because we have such a spectacular array of experts on stage that with their experience and knowledge, they will tell us a great deal about a very large subject which we have been presented with, civilizational knowledge and India's governance ethos. But I thought that initially, at least, we can try and focus this around the venue that gives its name to this festival, which is Nalanda, a byword for the educational system of the ancient world, throughout the world. That would be a great idea to sort of concentrate on that first, especially because we have somebody who's authored a book, Echoes of Nalanda, so is an expert. Mr. Sinha has also studied Nalanda very deeply in many aspects. And of course, since you are handling the ITDC and tourism is one of your subjects, and Nalanda is a major tourist spot, so you would also, I presume, have a very conversant knowledge with what went on in Nalanda and so on and so forth. So first of all, can we just start off by what was the governance ethos that the institution of Nalanda University had? Can I start with Mr. Sinha and then I'll come to Dr. Sharma and then finally to you, Mugdha. So because we were discussing a little bit before the panel began, and he was highlighting certain very interesting aspects about the details of how Nalanda itself functioned. And I was very interested because these were aspects of governance of Nalanda University, which would therefore also have implications for governance generally, as far as other institutions and even nation states are concerned. Amarjeet ji, how did Nalanda function?
Thank you, Sunit. Thank you, Ganga. For somebody whose home district is Nalanda, it's a real delight to be here. I also had the privilege to be the Principal Secretary Education in Bihar at a time when the new university was coming up and to be on its board. So that is where a lot of the familiarity increased. But more importantly, there are two people whose research I would like to refer to. One who's not published yet, but he's been lecturing on it and is expected to publish very soon, Dr. Shailendra Raj Mehta, who's been the Vice Chancellor of the Ahmedabad University in the past. But more importantly, he had a passion to understand where it all began. How was governance thought through in the Nalanda and other universities at that time? What made them last so long? What made them function the manner in which they did? While he has lectured on it, many of which are available on the net, he is not published formally as yet, but we expect his book to come out very soon. I've had the privilege of hearing a lot of what he's collected, the documents, as also the scripts and so on. And based on that analysis, more or less, they were able to zero in on what were some of the governing principles. Very clearly, Nalanda, which is one, the university system is something we can all be proud as Indians. It is a contribution of India to the world in the manner in which we understand universities. Historically, this is where it all began. More importantly, the functioning of that university, there were rules that were framed to govern the functioning of universities, some of which we hope Shailendra will bring out when he publishes. They were about democratic functioning. They were about freedom of expression and religion. They were about associating guilds in the business of running universities. Because it was these guilds who maintained both the democratic character of the university as also provided a feedback for the university to see whether or not it was on the right track. The issue of land grants, as we understand today, we thought that it all came only in the US. Land grant was one of the very basic organizing principles. And I still recall at the time when I had the chance to work on the board, on one of the occasions, there was a publication which had come out with identified 200 adjoining villages around Nalanda which had a syncretic relationship with the university. Some product or the other was coming from there. So the functioning was truly democratic in all its aspects. The issue of endowments to support the university. Now, I think some of these principles are universal principles which hold for all times. And if it continued, the legacy remained for so long, from the time about 6th century or so, right down to the period that it remained alive till, clearly shows that there's something in the functioning from which we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to be proud about. The university system came from here. We have a lot to learn on the basic premises and principles which made this happen. And equally important, which is only further reinforced by K. Abhay's book, where he describes faculty members at different times in Nalanda. And when you read all of them together, you realize you've done a 360 degree. The perspectives and viewpoints are completely opposite. Perhaps an Aryabhat could never have thought through what he did if there were no other to challenge him. So the debate and discussions and how they contribute to the growth of ideas in society, I think is a lesson from Nalanda, the lesson of governance in a framework that allows wider participation and where universities in some manner are connected to the societies that they are a part of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha. You have referred to two scholars who worked on Nalanda already. Kavita ji is the third scholar who's worked on Nalanda with her book. So may I request you to tell us what conclusions you've drawn in the course of writing your book, Echoes of Nalanda, not only for the higher educational system of India, and for, which might be relevant to the present-day higher educational system, but also for governance in general.
Thank you very much, Sumit. And thank you, Ganga, for having me here. Now, I see, unfortunately or fortunately, everything through the lens of education. And so I used to wonder that every document starts with Nalanda. And so why? 9 centuries almost have gone by, and so what is so special about it? And of course, the fascination. 1991, Navnihar Nalanda, and then Nalanda International University, and 2 presidents inspired both of them. And so I thought, well, you can't replicate that university because times have changed, teachers have changed, students have changed. So, and in any case, they were monk scholars. And those who joined were also aspiring to be monks, although they were lay people, but even they had to follow the rigid discipline of the monastic this thing. Now, in our times, what happens is that the teaching-learning process is a very mechanical process. But as I Ching emphatically says, that the instruction of pupils was the most important thing of Nalanda, which made it great, which made it survive. And if it wasn't there, the quality of teaching wasn't there, the university would have perished. And so he says, steps were taken to continually maintain the excellence. Now, many factors contributed. One is that there was an ecosystem of education in Rajgir, or Rajgriha it was called. Nagarjun and Asanga were the precursors, but there's a tradition that Suvishnu, I think, established 108 temples and collated texts from 3 BC onwards and got them systematized. Now, nowadays we have, lot of universities, but what we do is we put them in a vacuum. I guess it's inevitable because now access has moved from only elite to general access. Now, great scholars of great caliber were at Nalanda. So that, and their fame was not only in India, but all over. So what we talk of internationalization was already there. Korea, Japan, Tibet, China. So, what made them come? It was the quality of instruction. Then was also due to uninterrupted policy of discipline. They had to follow the Vinay Patrika because they had And so that discipline was very, very important to the university. Hamare time mein to, of course, discipline is the least of our problems. And also the teaching learning process has become a very mechanical kind of a process. Also, teacher-student interactions. They were very intimate and systematic. So it was mainly a tutorial method of teaching. And then the teacher, I was surprised, also in the morning just didn't give him lessons, but also examined his moral conduct. And he felt if he had transgressed, then he should confess so that he doesn't do it again. Now, again, debates, discussions, they formed an integral part of teaching learning. So, hamare yahan to chalk and talk, even today, in most parts of the country. Then admission process was rigorous. So you had the Dwarpals of Nalanda who examined the students, and if you didn't succeed, then you were turned away. And I Ching says out of 10 people, only about 2 succeeded. So it was a rigorous
20% success rate for the entrance examination, which was taken at the entrance.
Yeah. So they weren't allowed to enter the place. And their fame as a debater was also ruined after that. So I guess we have to do social engineering for the same reason that now access has to be given. But I think we have a lesson from China there. They also do social engineering, but they don't compromise on their standard. So those who don't succeed in that cutoff that after the entrance exam is declared, then they are sent for 2 years of prep training, which is free of cost. So you are not penalized for that. The curriculum, as we know, was extensive. All the schools of Buddhism, apart from Mahayana, Shabd Vidya, Chikitsa Vidya, and as you rightly pointed out, Aryabhat couldn't have worked without all these things. Atharva Veda, Sankhya philosophy, mathematics, sculpture, and architecture. Now, hamare yahan it has been a rather narrow curriculum, although the NEP is trying to widen it. But let's see what happens. Great emphasis on Shabd Vidya, because they said the word has to be understood, because it conceals as much as it reveals. Pedagogy, discourses, debates. Xuanzang says that 10,000 priests and students were there, and 100 pulpits were there. But I think I Ching is more realistic. He says 3,000. But even when there were discourses, great emphasis was on personal interactions. You could ask lots of questions, unlike now, what happens. As I said, personalized teacher-student interaction, and all lectures took the form of discussion. So discussion, debate, and some discourses, of course. Then, now, what led it to decline? It declined much before Bakhtiyar Khilji. One was Tantrism, which was unacceptable in the society. And of course, what it did was that it led to a disconnect with the people. The other was the use of Sanskrit. Because Buddha had insisted that you will talk in the local language and you would go out and preach. But then when you had Sanskrit, then there was again a disconnect. And it reminded me of our English education, which of course I'm a little ambiguous about. Both are necessary. Today you need the English also. And then you had, once the monasteries were built, then the monks also withdrew into the monasteries. They were no longer going out, and they were so affluent, no longer going out to beg for alms. So again, the disconnect. And as my predecessor pointed out, the land grants. While land grants were there for the maintenance, but they also, as you said, 200 villages. Xuanzang said 100, and then by the time I Ching came, it was 200. But then the problem was that they became like landlords.
Absolutely. They had to be administering the villages all the time.
Yes, so then
Took up the time.
people were very, this thing. And then, the interference of the king or of the governor because before Pala dynasty came, the person chosen like Shilbhadra were people of great eminence, And the university was supported by a whole lot of kings, but they were left to do their own governance. With the Pala dynasty, who were tantric followers, they insisted on the curriculum, and they also insisted in getting a say into who would be the head of that institution. And then when the decline started because of this, then the monks also got corrupted. And they got into revenue disputes and court cases and all of that. So this always happens when there is a decline. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kavita ji. You've painted a fantastic arc of 2,000 years of history. You have more or less compressed for us and given us a wonderful, vivid picture of how the place ran, how it grew to eminence, and how it declined thereafter. I want to turn now to Mugdha ji. Mugdha ji, what are the kind of lessons that we can take from the statements that have been made by the previous two speakers about administration and about the rise and decline of Nalanda? Can you draw anything which is of civilizational value for administration today?
I think what is very interesting is that, from what I've heard from everybody, that there is a cycle, and the reasons for the rise and reasons for the decline, whether it be in ancient India or in the contemporary time, kind of remain the same. And I think that should be the focus, because they say that if you don't learn from history, you tend to repeat the lessons of history. And I think it is very, very important to learn that. There's a very important writer, John Glibb, who studied 250 years of several empires, very important empires, and he says that every empire, similar very much to a fiefdom or to an education dom in Nalanda, all begins with a sense of conquest, followed by, and there's a lot of intellectualism, followed by what is called the age of consolidation, where you actually look at governance. And then what happens is, then the decline starts. And the reasons for decline are very similar to what ma'am has mentioned. And the reason for decline is that people become lazy, people become lethargic, and the core values of citizenship change to customer values, which basically means that as power aggregates, you become more interested in power. And that is where interference, as she mentioned, that is where shift of focus from education to other things, land grants, management of the fiefdom begins. So I think that is very important. But having said that, I think what we must look at, because Nalanda is the best example of India's frame of reference. Because today we actually talk about what are the frames of reference. And if I see Nalanda as that one best example of that frame of reference, so I think India's continuous civilizational ethos has given us one scale, huge scale, continuity of course, then range, the vastness in which India has given, India's traditional knowledge system has given us frames, various frames. And antiquity, of course, means that there is a lot of depth. And I can give you an example. If you look at culture, I think India's philosophy is not existentialist in that sense. It is more essentialist. And Karl Popper has actually spoken about that. If you look at the theory of aesthetics, because we always grapple if India has a theory of aesthetics, or do we have to look at the Western frame to understand a theory of aesthetics. Nalanda has beautiful architecture in terms, the old Nalanda has beautiful architecture. The Manas Shilpa Shastra actually, and in governance we always talk of silos, non-multidisciplinary or non-translational work that we do, and we keep talking of breaking the silos, right? So the Manas Shilpa Shastra, which in fact Vitruvius, he based his entire book, La Architectura, on the Manas Shilpa Shastra, and in his foreword, he actually attributes, and I have studied both of them, and if you look at both of them, you will find that it is a Latin translation of the Sanskrit copy, and what is being taught in schools today is the Vitruvius principles of architecture, rather than the Manashilpa Shastra. So I think when we talk of Nalanda, we cannot talk of Nalanda in isolation, because Nalanda is the best depiction of India's frame of reference that India has given. And today I think the contemporary world, be it sociology, be it anthropology, be it political science, be it governance, be it our academic ethos, we must learn from how India has given both methodology, the knowledge systems, the pedagogy, and the frame of reference to approach different subjects. And I think that is the biggest contribution of India's civilizational history, civilizational ethos, whatever you call it, or 5,000 or 7,000, however you might want to place it. And I think that gets best exemplified in Nalanda, and that is for us to emulate in the contemporary times today.
Thank you for ending on that note, because I was tempted to turn the conversation to precisely that. How far are we from emulating these concepts which stood Nalanda in good stead at its height? That is, for instance, the discussion, debate, dissent, the structures to control quality, the structures to ensure that everybody had the access to the teachers, as well as access to anything that they wanted, and the freedom to also question and help develop and further, take forward everything that exists around the university. All aspects of the university, I'm sure, were open to debate and discussion. So, how much have we succeeded or failed in implementing these principles, Amarjeet ji?
As somebody who spent many years in the education sector in the state and in the central government, I can only say that expansion with excellence is a tough ask, very tough ask. As Madam rightly said, as you move towards a massification of even higher education in some form, to manage quality and standards with the resources at hand becomes a challenge. But that is not the only issue. There are huge governance challenges at all times. And I think in many manners, many ways, at the state level, at the national level, at every level, at various points of time in the last 5 decades, we've had some success stories. The IITs, after all, were a part of this, the IIT Act of 1961, and how it protected the IITs on its governance and management, how it encouraged excellence, flexibility, and so on. Similarly, other institutions also, we've had some excellent institutions, the NITs subsequently, the national law schools and the manner in which they were crafted. I used to interact a lot with Professor N.R. Madhav Menon, who set up the national law schools. And you'll be surprised that some of the principles that he followed were taken from the Nalanda example as well. For example, in the national law schools, Professor Menon was very clear that no national law school should depend on the salaries of its faculty on government all the time. Because if that were to happen, it will lose its autonomy. So while the physical infrastructure came from the support of state governments, land came from state governments, but when it came to supporting and recurring expenses of these institutions, Professor Menon's thought process was earn your own resources, which is able, that's why even in the National Law School in Bangalore, for example, there is an undergraduate course for the large distance education program, which brings in a lot more money. So I think some of those principles of autonomy at the institution level, not to become over-dependent on state resources, but in some manner to craft your institution which protects its liberty, its freedom, its ability to discuss, debate, and so on.
So these are lessons learned directly from Nalanda. But what about lessons in the area of general governance, not just in the governance of higher educational institutions, but also in governance per se? Mugdha?
So I'll again go back to the frame of reference and tell you, we believe that India's philosophical ethos rests on dharma. And dharma is not akin to religion, it is basically the Buddhist philosophy of balancing. So when we talk of rule-based, right, and this is a thing that we talk a lot in the government, that rule-based administration. If you look at it from the principle of dharma, it will say that balance the rule with justice. If you look at justice, it will say balance the justice with fairness, which is what Michael Sandler also writes in his book. So balance is the principle. There is an inherent check and balance. And a while before you were talking of debate, our entire philosophy is based on the principle of vad, which basically means dialogue. Dialogue means debate, debate means dissent, and dissent means letting the best thing come forward, right? So I think these are some of the challenges that there always will be. Human civilization or contemporary civilization today is not immune from this.
How much, if I'm sorry to interrupt you, but how much does debate and dialogue still play a role in governance, in administration?
It is very important because if you talk of any policy making in the system, the principles of policy making tell you that you have to listen to an empathetic listening to all your stakeholders. Yep. If you don't listen to your stakeholders, if you don't listen to what is happening at the ground level, I don't think you can make any policy which will be successful in its outcomes, in its delivery. And if you look at the structure of the Indian civil service, and I'm talking of the Indian Administrative Service in particular, you will find that we begin at the field. The idea of making us begin at the field is to be able to develop our skills to listen to what is happening around us. And our role at that point, the first 9 to 12 years, is to be able to implement policies somebody else has made. So that when you face hurdles in implementing any of those policies based on ground truthing, and when you rise up, you are able to take care of those issues while conceiving and curating new policies. So the listening mode is always there in the way the whole architecture has been done. Whether people follow it, it is also dependent on who occupies the position at that point in chair or the designation at that point in chair for it to become, because making a policy is one thing, adhering and implementing it in the true spirit in which the letter was meant is something which will depend on the person who's holding it. And I also would want to mention something. I think what is very important today is that the civil service has to become a conduit between the civil society, very, very important, and governance. That role that the civil society needs to play is something that comes from our civilizational ethos. In our understanding, even the ontological beings had agency. India has been the fabled center of the world. If you look at how our youngsters were trained, were taught, were groomed, forget the gurukuls during the Mahabharats and the Ramayana time, but even when I was a child, we were brought up on Panchatattva and Hitopdesh, written by Vishnugupta, which we all know traveled through the Middle West and went to France, and then they devised something called the Fables of the World. So it is very important, and those stories didn't have human beings. They had ontological beings as characters, as the main protagonist, and each one of them had agency. And today we are talking of giving agency to our rivers. And some of the countries around the world have actually gone ahead and done it. So I think that today we live in a world of climate change, sustainability, and I think India already was doing that. We should ask ourselves the question, what happened? At what point in time did we move away from the various frames of reference that were given to us? We are known as the mother of democracy. We had the Gram Samitis, we had the 16 republics. We had so many. We also have stories of being the first country to provide asylum to a group of people who have moved out from Iran and had come to Gujarat. Yeah. So what we talk of human rights, we had done in ancient India. In ancient India itself.
That's right, before that.
So I think these are things that we already have. How And also one more thing, it is not always a question where you ask, what is the government doing? It is also a time where we have to, because we all belong to a mass, to a fraternity of not just bureaucracy or civil service, but also to the larger civil society.
Right.
Principles of advocacy.
Yeah.
Can we become advocates? Can we become demanders for the government? I think these are also skills that need to be taught, and the bridge or the conduit will enable that both the parts, the sums of the society are able to work for a more holistic understanding.
What you're saying sounds absolutely wonderful in theory, and I hope it can be translated into practice more systematically than it is being done at present. Yeah.
Governance and society have to work together. Sir,
Absolutely, absolutely. Kavita ji, I want to ask a more specific question, which is that you have headed the South Asian University also, and Hindu College before that. You have also headed the India International Center. How many of these principles of ancient civilization, ethos, ways of governance, that the methods of governance that we have just discussed, were you, do you think, looking back, able to apply in these various different institutions?
Thank you for that question, but I'm a little more cynical about the whole thing because...
Good discussion, debate and dissent are very important.
Because while you try to be as democratic, as participatory as possible, but our rules are so outdated and so moribund, and you have to follow them, otherwise it leads to lots of problems, both for you and for the institution. So, well, as I said, you try, but then you get bogged down also. Sometimes you wonder what in heaven's name are you actually doing? Actually, India International Center was a little more giving you space than Hindu College and South Asian University. Because there, of course, we're dealing with one government is bad enough, but when you have to deal with 8 governments, then it becomes a disaster.
You're talking about the South Asian University.
Yeah, South
Obviously,
Asian University,
yes.
which of course, the structure of governance, to be more serious about it, was so convoluted that it has fallen into disuse and disrepair.
Well, let's avoid that now. Let's get to the
No, in the
places where
sense
we are
that if
talking
you
about
have-
purely Indian institutions such as IIC and the Hindu College. What about those?
Hindu College was okay, but as I said hinted that, student indiscipline, teacher indiscipline. I used to ask my colleagues, why do you go on strike at 11 o'clock in the morning? and why do you send out a notice that there will be no classes held? Who has given you the right to say that no classes will be held? Those who want to teach, let them teach. So indiscipline. Also such a moribund curriculum. It's so outdated. Its relevance to society is not there. And yet you have to follow it. And there is a set pattern of exam. So, your hands are pretty much tied. I think the best governance that happens is in the co-curricular activities of the student. Because there they have the freedom.
Right.
And you are the person who should give them that freedom. So I would encourage societies to happen, call people that...
In general, you would advocate more freedom in the governance
more
of
freedom,
educational
more
institutions,
flexibility, more freedom, and more, which I was trying to say, connect with the society.
Right.
The connect is not there.
Right. I wanted to take that up with Mr. Sinha, particularly because you have worked a lot with connecting with society in terms of many self-help groups, NGOs, various other ground-level organizations, and you have worked in administration at the highest level. So how do you connect these two, and how much in your experience as an administrator were you able to apply the principles we have just discussed emerging out of Nalanda and about the emerging from the ancient Indian ethos?
No, thanks for this question. I mean, very clearly, as was also said by Mugdha, governance and society cannot be seen in isolation. The lessons are very clear. The civil society organizations, many of whom that I work with, if it was not for them, to be partners with programs that governments work on, I don't think that scale or quality would ever be achieved. Civil society is a necessity, anything that you roll out. And that these are lessons, even if you look deeply into many of the principles of excellence and equity. Unless and until the gender question, I think these are all fundamental issues, but they need to be flagged, because unless and until the women's agency changes, a lot of what we want to do, we will not be able to do. Now, given these contexts, governance and society, the interplay has to be much more. There are many social values that need change and transformation. The gender relations, one of them, among others. But clearly, I think what comes out very clearly, if you were to do an analysis of all that has happened in the last 5-6 decades, clearly, wherever some little success has been achieved, and there are many sectors where we seem to have done well as a country, in all those endeavors, professionals at scale, principles of decentralization, for example. Why is it that provinces which decentralized have better human development indicators, have higher per capita consumption expenditures, and are also the provinces which attract more private investments? What is it that they did right, and how did it come about? The common lesson we find in all of them is women's education. Provinces which had focused on adolescent girls and their school and higher education participation, at the end of the day, they perform much better on many indicators.
They have a multiplier effect on all other indicators.
Absolutely.
Right. No, thank you very much. I think we are coming to the end of a formal part of this panel discussion. We'll open it out for questions. But before that, may I ask each of you in 1 or 2 minutes to sum up the recommendations, the roadmap for the future, drawing from this ancient Indian civilizational ethos. What would you recommend in any sector you wish to, or in general? What recommendations you would make drawing from these ancient systems, ancient ways of thinking, ancient ways of administering? What would you like to see implemented in the future? Kavita ji?
Less rigidity, more flexibility, more freedom to think and to act, and interaction does not need to be so feudal as it is. So, that I think is some of the things. I mean, one hasn't thought through all of them, but yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
No, it's good from top of the mind recall, whatever comes to your mind. Fine. Mugdha ji?
I think what is needed today is intergenerational policy making, because I am a generation X, and I'm sure a lot of people in the generation today belong to the millennials, zennials, and even the alphas and the betas have been born now. Yeah. So I think I have 5 generations ahead of me, and I have a couple of generations above me. And I think we today, when we look from the policy makers' lens perspective, I think we will need to. You look at any sector, the needs, the aspirations, the lingo of all these generations and how they think are completely different. Their expectations from life is completely different. How they want to approach work is completely different. How they want to approach leisure is completely different. So I think we will have to look at all these demanders for the government, because I'm in the government and I am not cynical by nature. I can't afford to be, because I think if there's something wrong, that I will stand up. And Bihar has given us one very good example other than Nalanda. Nalanda is a more institutional example. Bihar gave us Mr. Majhi. My mom used to tell me when I was a child that ekla chalo re. I mean, don't wait for anybody else. If you think you can initiate, right? And I think for the longest time I'd ask her, I mean, tell me an example who's actually done something concrete and tangible, which is... And then came Majhi, and we saw the movie, and she said, there you have this example of Mr. Majhi, who can actually carve a road out of a mountain. So I think I will not be cynical at any point in my life, because even if the impact is small, sow the seed. And don't think that the seed will bear fruit in your time. Sow the seed and allow people to come and nurture it, to water it. And I think that is what the message that I would want to leave. And freedom comes with a lot of responsibility. Freedom cannot be something that freedom is in fact is the most difficult. It's a word with a lot of gravitas. So I will not use it. I will use it with a lot of caution. And I say that freedom comes with a lot of sense of responsibility. I like to wear mine and see how I can make space, and space is freedom for me, how I can make space for people, how I can listen to them. And even if what I do is a small measure, I will continue to do that small measure consistently. There are no struggles, there are only strivings, and some strivings lead to good results, some strivings don't.
Very well put. Thank you very much indeed. And finally, in this round, Mr. Sinha, please.
No, I think ultimately, if you look at where we are as a nation, we've done well on many parameters. I mean, 35 years of 6.5% growth is no mean achievement for any country in this time. Many other parameters, stability, macro stability indicators are better than what they have been in the past and so on. Some changes in the social indicators also. But if you were to do a one-line analysis where we don't do so well, it seems to be an inability to craft credible community institutions that are impactful. They require collaborative governance. And what Nalanda places before us, collaborative governance understood in its simplest language as a form of governance where non-state actors have a consensual decision-making role. Many of the sectors where we don't do well, whether it's nutrition, schooling, education, learning outcomes, so on, ultimately the challenge is one of crafting credible community institutions which follow principles of collaborative governance. And there's a lot of lessons in the processes of Nalanda, whether it is about democratic functioning, whether it's about freedom of expression and religion, whether it's about guilds to reinforce the democratic character. All these are examples of collaboration. So collaborative governance is the message which I take from Nalanda for our times to move differently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think all three of our panelists have spoken very eloquently and more or less seem to be converging on this collaborative, consultative nature of governance that is required, which is the primary lesson perhaps we can draw from Nalanda and from our ancient ethos. So now it's time to open this discussion out to some questions from the audience. Yes, please raise your hands. And my request is, we prefer a question and a short, sharp, pointed question.
I'm Dr. Manish Karwar, a faculty member at Department of African Studies at University of Delhi.
Wonderful.
My question obvious for Professor Kavita Sharma. Ma'am, just you reiterated, as a very profound person, 25 years as a faculty member, principal, president of South Asian University and IIC president. But still you are talking about that the students and the teachers, they are ill-mannered or not ill-mannered. That means you are not control them in a democratic way. Then how it is very important that how a common person, how a common teacher would do that thing. Because you are too powerful. This means you are principal, you are president, and you are director, ICC. So this is my first. So how come a general teacher or general student can behave in a good manner?
You do have a lot of dialogue, but when it comes to certain statutes, as you well know, ordinances, statutes, you are just left helpless. And so you try as much as possible, and you create as much flexibility in your interactions as you possibly can within that framework. So, now it becomes even more rigid. You have an entrance test where you are allocated your colleges. You don't even have the freedom to choose your student. So there are a lot of factors here and a lot of political interference. So interference, matlab, everybody is connected to something or the other. Whether it's a region or whether it's a caste, whether it is a religion, whether whatever. So everyone or some political party, so they are not serving their own interest. They are serving the interest of that particular whatever they are trying to do. And there's mediocrity. What do they do after they finish their BA? What do they do after they finish? So there's no incentive to excel in this whole system.
So these things need to be addressed, is what you're saying. And some of the old principles might help us address these shortcomings. Mr. Mahesh.
Kavita, you were really extraordinary in your presentation. I just wanted to know that, okay, the university, this Nalanda, was known for dialogue, debates, discussion. So that leads to discovery of truth. So can you list out some inventions, some discoveries that came out because of this pedagogy of dialogue, discussion, debates, discovering the truth?
You know, the great Pandits of Nalanda and the seminal works that they wrote, those are the works we still study today, and which can hardly be said of most of our academics. So that is the main contribution that they made, was that they gave you seminal thought and seminal writing, which has stood stood its time through centuries.
I think one example of Aryabhat was already mentioned, and there are many, many, many others.
Yeah, there are many others.
Dr. Dudeja, please quickly, one short question from you, and then we'll come that side.
The way our South Asian University is here now for quite some time, don't you think we can have this type of Nalanda pattern in the South Asian University, the way Nalanda was working?
Thank you for the question, but I think you've already answered it. You might like to reiterate your answer.
Well, you know, Nalanda had the autonomy of the teachers, whereas South Asian University or even other universities, they have such a strict structure of administration and governance, and that too, it is untenable. You can't be rotating everything every year between 8 countries. So once that is untenable, and then follow the SARC process of consensus, you can hardly hold a meeting. So, you know, Nalanda has, as has been pointed out, a freedom of thought, a freedom of whatever they wrote, a freedom of curriculum, what they chose to teach, and a freedom of when to finish with the student and say that now you are qualified. You have had so many public debates and you have qualified yourself. So that is not possible in maybe it's just not possible in our times.
Right, absolutely. The gentleman there, please identify yourself and your question.
Good afternoon, respected panelist. My name is Vikas. I am from Atmaram Sanatana Dharma Mahavidyalaya, Delhi University. My question is to Amarjeet sir. I am listening you from long time and understand about you. You have worked in the education sector, Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan also. My question is that in the last budget, Sitaraman, finance minister, said that we are making towns, educational towns, but we know that the basic structure of Indian education system in the primary section have very weakened. And what are your thinking about that? We are developing the highest, हम ऊपरी मंजिल बना रहे और नीच की हमारी जो मंजिल है वो कमजोर है, तो मैं उसे कैसे मजबूत किया जा सकता है और क्या विचार आपका इसके ऊपर? थैंक यू.
बड़ा कठिन सवाल पूछ दियो. I completely agree with you that if you don't fix the highway, any number of new initiatives will not deliver the outcomes that you're looking for. And fixing the highway is about adequacy. Fixing the highway is about governance. Fixing the highway is about capacity. Now, key core concerns in any large public system, if you don't address them to make them more accountable, any amount of new initiatives will not be able to deliver what we want. And clearly, education is one sector. When you go to mass education, the good news is that everyone has come to schools, whether vulnerable social groups, their children. Class 8, almost in the entire country, most children seem to have joined the school system. But the bad news is only 1 in 4 is learning what is expected of them. Now, this learning challenge is the biggest challenge before us. Not all of it can be explained only by finances or the lack of it. Many of it has to do with capacity and governance challenges as well. So my answer to your question is, if you focus on fixing the highway, which includes, and I'm glad day before yesterday, the ministry has come out with a new school management committee guidelines, where community leaders are now the chairman and the vice chairman of school management committees. I think it is a step in the right direction. It is probably going to help. You will need to communitize school systems. you will need to create community learning spaces which can be far more effectively utilized for purposes for what they are meant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Oh, there's one at the back, the lady at the back. Please identify yourself. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. So I am actually a second-year student from Delhi University. And ma'am, I had a question with you, Mugdha Sana ma'am, that you talked about the architecture of Nalanda University. So I had a doubt that Nalanda University was the best of its time, and till now we look forward to it. Do you think that any present university or any present institution matches that level, the kind of level, resources and everything Nalanda had, Nalanda contained in itself? And also, ma'am, I had one more question saying that how was the women participation, as we talked about the discussions and dialogues that used to go on over there in that time? How much women participation was there in the university?
Thank you.
Thank you.
The kind of spectacular architecture, infrastructure that they had, I don't think anyone has it. What was your question apart from the infrastructure? You said
Ma'am, it was about women participation in the
women
dialogues and
participation.
discussions.
As far as I understand it, but maybe you can answer it better, there weren't any women there.
Yeah.
So the gender participation was just nil. It didn't exist. Which is sad, but it didn't exist.
Yeah, ma'am, that was like, why is it so?
To your first question, which with regard to architecture, so in 2023, which was when India was completing 100 years of India's first woman architect, Yuli Chaudhary, who was India's first woman architect, she completed 100 years in 2023. Then, when I was in the Ministry of Culture, we dedicated our entire India Art, Architecture and Design Biennale to her, because we thought that architecture and design can be very, very useful nudges for behavioral change. And at that point in time, in one of our pavilions, we actually studied from each of the states the top 5 important architectural buildings post India's independence since 1947 to 2023. And there is an entire 8-volume series which we published post the Biennale, which has documented not just schools and colleges, but other private and public buildings which follow different architectural styles in India, and which I think is the only repository of capturing such architectural works in contemporary India. You might want to have a look at that, because the idea is not to make beautiful buildings. The idea is to understand the principles which bring together the people. If you have a chance to read the Manas Shilpa Shastra, you will find that our measurements were done by hand. Our putting skin in the game, which I think is very important. We were measuring everything with a human body. And there was an architecture. The Michelangelo's man that you see is actually what India gave to the world, but what we today look at from the age of enlightenment.
Leonardo's Vitruvian man.
Leonardo's Vitruvius man, yes. That is something that came from the Manas Shilpa Shastra. And that is how the whole principle of the human body actually was used to construct temples in India. So I think we must go back to from where we've come, at least read them, transcribe them, and allow people access to our digitized versions of manuscripts, so that what is written in them can be made public knowledge. Dissemination of what is captured by our ancient seas should become public knowledge, should become accessible. Just the way Nalanda was accessible to Fahen. When Fahen came to the door, we did not ask him, show me your iCard, show me your whatever, what do you want to do, PhD? We opened the field for him, and we allowed him to write a lot of manuscripts which he carried back, to copy those manuscripts which he carried back. to China from where he came, and he then transcribed them in his Chinese language.
Ma'am, I have a follow-up question for that.
Very quickly, please.
Yes, ma'am.
We are running out of time.
Ma'am, as you said about like it has to be more accessible, then don't you think that India, if we look at it like the present scenario, then it is considered a bit backward in knowledge and all. Like not, it's like we have to prove for everything. Now, if we make our manuscripts and all accessible, and if we go ahead in the front of the world, then don't you think we'll have to prove ourselves a lot that, okay, we had all of this?
No, manuscript
No.
would be authentic, right? So you will have to just transcribe it and translate it and make it available. You don't have to prove it then.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank
you so much,
The
ma'am.
manuscripts are proof in themselves.
You might want to copyright them so that people,
Yeah, exactly.
people don't make the Kolhapuris of India the Pradas of the world. So that might be required.
Well, to a certain extent, it's already been done because you've already said that the principles of Vitruvian man were taken from India. So many principles, the mathematical systems of the world are taken from India. So it's already been done. The world has already benefited greatly from Indian knowledge, and we learn a little bit more about this from the man who's recently been in the limelight for bringing this out. Excuse me, and that's William Dalrymple tomorrow. But anyway, thank you very much for a wonderful session. Thank you, audience, for your fantastic participation. And particular thanks to Professor Kavita Sharma, to Ms. Mugdha Sinha, and to Shri Amarjeet Sinha also for participating in this fantastic discussion. Thank you very much.